to the Charlotte area, Mecklenburg County to be specific. So we've talked a lot about this. We're talking about the budget here in Mecklenburg County. Mecklenburg County set to finalize a $2.5 billion budget. There are a lot of things that Julie Kay covers, some twists and turns in this budget, some things that we should know. So let's start there. What is the one thing or a few things that stick out from this budget that folks should know?
So the county is dealing with the same thing that pretty much every county in the state is dealing with, something the city's dealing with, and that is that the sales tax is not as much as they were anticipating or hoping. That's a post-COVID thing. It's just not growing as much as it would be prior to this. At the same time, we're dealing with all sorts of funding cuts coming from the federal side, potentially from the state. So people are kind of gearing down, buckling up, and we're not being very spendy this year. So this budget is going to come with some nonprofit cuts, some nonprofit grants will not be renewed, and a slight property tax increase, assuming it's all passed as is now. That would be less than 1 cent. So for the average homeowner, that would just be $36 a year, but still something to note for sure.
Well, I guess what is the reaction from the budget? Is there, sometimes when it comes to budgets in general, there are people that are just really just upset about it, and some people that are just like, okay, hey, it's a budget.
I think it depends on who you ask at this point.
On,
But great points. I know that I listened in last week. They had their straw vote, which is just their informal, let's send this through the next round. It's where they talk about amendments, things like that, which we'll get to in a second. But there were 2 commissioners that were like, I don't want to push this through. I don't want to have to explain another property tax increase to my constituents. Of course, it's not necessarily a big one, but when we're pinching pennies at this point, $36 a year, still something people are thinking about. So there was a little bit of pushback, and I'm curious about what those conversations looked like in between, because that was only last Thursday. So it's only been, what is that, a long weekend, I suppose, in between. So I'm curious if there will be a lot of discussion back and forth tonight, or if it's just, we did that behind the scenes and now we're ready to go. In terms of the nonprofit cuts, that's definitely garnering a lot more attention, just because it is more significant in terms of the dollar figures we're talking about. That pretty much means eliminating this year at least their community service grants, which are one-time grants that nonprofits are given. Again, those can be, awarded again the next year, but they're per year basis. That's just not really happening this year. There are a few nonprofits that are going to get some funding. There are some that originally weren't, and that was changed in this last meeting. For example, Crisis Assistance Ministry, I spoke to them. They were generally funded, except for their financial assistance program. They help people who are facing evictions learn about, how to move forward from that. And that's, a service you usually have to pay for, and they offer that for free. So they got about half of the funding they requested for that, but we're talking like hundreds of thousands of dollars for even just this one nonprofit that was cut. So there are definitely some big changes happening.
Have you got a chance to speak with any of these nonprofits?
Yeah, a couple. And even what's interesting too is even some that aren't facing massive cuts right now are still nervous. I spoke with CareRing, and they do all sorts of things for people who are uninsured or underinsured in terms of health care. And they said, actually, we are lucky, the Mecklenburg County budget, we're going to be fine. But we are bracing for all sorts of other changes, state level, federal level. We don't know what that's going to look like yet. And so they even still decided to speak at the public hearing a couple weeks ago just to say, hey, this is what we've done with this ARPA funding you gave us a couple years ago. These are the numbers. This is what we're doing to help, because people even that are in these positions where they're okay now are still awaiting larger changes. So it really all wraps together.
Yeah, I feel like that's sort of the theme this year when it comes to the nonprofit sector. A lot of nonprofits that I spoke with just are kind of bracing for, they don't know what's going to happen next. So that's what sounds like that's the case there. I know it's set to be finalized. Do we have a timeline on when it will actually be finalized? That's the tricky part, right?
Asking some great questions, that's for sure. I would love to know. The meeting is at 6 tonight.
Okay.
So sometime tonight is expected. Okay. They've gone through all the steps prior to this in the timeline that was anticipated. Yeah. And so nothing that I've heard would, alert me to it's going to be a huge, long discussion, but knock on wood.
It was a 4-hour meeting last night, right?
And that was
yeah.
city, and so
Yeah.
that's even smaller. Of course, still a big budget,
Yeah.
but a smaller radius to work with. So that's another thing too. We're talking
Yeah.
about both city and county at the same time. So the city isn't expected to fully adopt theirs until next week. They had their straw vote last night. But like I mentioned, dealing with the same hurdles. Of course, sales tax revenue is not where we would hope, and kind of that post-COVID lull, and these larger federal funding cuts that could be coming. So everyone's just kind of hunkering down for now.
That's why we have Julie Kay here in the studio, because again, you got the Mecklenburg County budget, you got
a lot of
city
numbers.
budget. It's just a lot happening at one time, and
Yeah.
I think that's the sentiment with a lot of folks, viewers.
Yes.
It's like a lot happening at once.
I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you.
Right.
So just bear with me. I know. But that is unfortunately just what it is right now. Bottom line is nonprofits will be facing some cuts potentially, and homeowners might be dealing with a little bit of property tax, but it's under 1 cent, so it's nothing major, but still of note, of course.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
When it comes to the nonprofit sort of aspect of it, who determines who gets what? Like who gets awarded their full amount that they asked for,
Yep.
who doesn't? How does that process kind of work? People
That's
don't
a
know.
great question, and the commissioners actually went back and forth on that, and that's why last week's 4-hour meeting was quite long, because they were going back and forth of like, well, this one, for example, crisis assistance ministry. At first, they were like, okay, well, we originally funded them. I think it was $700,000 to $800,000 for this program. Let's fund half of that. Or one of the commissioners wanted them to fund it fully. Oh, what if we funded half of it for something else though, for rental assistance, because maybe that's more pressing right now. But we're already funding them for that. So it was a lot of back and forth. They are like at the point where they are doing this individually. So
Okay.
I know RAIN, for example, they work with patients with HIV and AIDS, and they work with education surrounding that here in Charlotte. I believe they got half of the funding added back in that they requested. So they did make some changes based on requests that happened after the initial proposal came out. But they're pulling at this point from their rainy day fund, and given we might have some rainy days coming, Dina DiOrio, she's the county manager, she's kind of encouraging them to not pull too much of that right now.
Okay.
Yeah, so it is a case-by-case basis. That's a great question. It's just kind of
What's prioritized that seems
Right.
worthy at the time.
right, and that right now is a lot of healthcare and housing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Julie Kay here in the Live Impact studio, breaking down the Mecklenburg County budget and a lot of other things that are happening in the world of politics.
Just a little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Julie, thank you for your time. Thank you for
Thank
stopping
you.
by. All right. Yeah, that is a lot. So I'm glad we have Julie here to break it down.